November 3rd, 2020, in the United States is the day of election, general election day. We will be electing our president, vice president, many governors, representatives for Congress, etc. And the closer we get to November the 3rd, the higher is the intensity of passions in our society. Advertising and anti-advertising, accusations and counter-accusations, aggressive attacks against political opponents, ridicule, offensive nicknames, name-calling, obscene language, and so forth. The degree of temperature in our society also affects those who are part of my spiritual family, Center for Spiritual Enrichment. We live in the society, we interact with the society, we are part of the society. So it affects us as well. I hear your statements when you talk to me or to other people in person, by phone. I see your text messages. I see what you post on social networks and so forth. And I felt compelled to spend 3 sermons today, the next week, and the week after, leading to the election day, talking about Jesus Christ and the politics. 3 sermons. And the first one, the one for today, is Jesus Christ, Republican, ? We will ask the following question. If Jesus Christ lived today, would he join the Republican Party or not? Why do we bother asking this question? Is it proper to talk about politics and the political parties in a church setting? Let's go to one important passage in the Bible, which is the Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verses 3 and 5. It says, "In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the people of Israel according to all that the Lord had commanded him given him in commandment to them. Beyond the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to explain this law, saying," it's a paradoxical phrase. The book of Deuteronomy is a speech that Moses gave, right? It's basically one speech. And it says that the purpose of this speech was, could you tell it? Could you say it out loud? Was to, verse number 5, was to, yes, explain the law. In the original is HaTorah, this Torah. And the unusual thing is that the book of Deuteronomy is part of the Torah, right? Torah or Pentateuch is 5 first books of the Bible. But the Bible states that the content of the book of Deuteronomy is an explanation of the Torah. Why? Because the Torah was given 40 years back when the children of Israel left Egypt and when they approached Mount Sinai, they received the Torah. They received all the laws. Some were written by God himself, some were given to Moses and he wrote them, but the scroll of the Torah was already there, or was it not? 40 years passed, and now Moses set to explain the Torah. Why was the need? unfortunately, during those 40 years, the generation that left Egypt, everyone over 20 years, except for 2 people, they all died. So 40 years later, we have another generation, different generation, new generation that needs to understand how to apply Torah in the land of promise, in the promised land. Therefore, we are taught here a very important principle. Each generation needs an explanation of how to apply God's law and God's commandments to specific situation right now. We need to know how to apply God's law, how to apply all God's revelation, the Holy Bible, to our current circumstances. And when we will be making the choice on November the 3rd, we need to be sure that our choice is a realization and actualization of the Torah. That's why I want us to talk about this topic. We have biblical precedent and biblical mandate to do so. So, how would you answer the question, would Jesus Christ become a Republican had he lived today? How could you start to answer that question? Well, this is what I came up with. We will compare the GOP political platform. That's an objective text, objective document that you could find on www.gop.com. So there is Republican Party political platform that's prepared for elections specifically. And we will see what's written there, what is the ideology of Republican Party, and we will compare it with another document. First of all, the Gospels that preserved the words of Jesus, but also we read in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 10 and 11, that all the prophets who were speaking from the beginning with Moses, they were all inspired by, let's take a look at verse 11. It says that the Spirit of Christ was in them, indicating when he testified beforehand and so forth. So Moses was led and inspired by the Spirit of Christ. Do you see it? All the prophets, beginning with Moses and to the last one before Jesus Christ, they were inspired by the same Spirit. So Jesus, in effect, was talking and revealing his will through Moses, through Samuel, through David, Isaiah, and so forth. And after his earthly ministry has come to an end, and he ascended to heaven, Jesus Christ continued talking. It says in the book of Revelation, chapter 2, verses 1 and 7, the following. To the angel of the church of Ephesus write, the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. And then there is this message to this church, and this is how it ends. Verse 7, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Who is speaking now? It starts with Jesus speaking, and each of the 7 messages to 7 churches finishes with this statement, listen to what the Spirit is saying. So you could see that Jesus talking and the Spirit is talking is the same entity, meaning that there is no separation, there is no contradiction. So Jesus began speaking through the Spirit of Christ, through Moses, and he finished speaking in the Bible at the end of the book of Revelation. So what we will be doing, we will be looking at the Republican platform that has 66 pages in it, and at this document, the Bible, the revelation of the Spirit of Christ, to compare ideology, compare statements and goals. Of course, we are limited in time, and we will be able to only touch on the things that to me stood out when I researched and when I read, when I compared, when I was thinking and analyzing. So that's our goal today. And first, I'd like to offer you some statements that most likely viewed favorably by Jesus. So Jesus says yes. Well, let's read. Man-made laws must be consistent with God-given natural rights. And if God-given natural inalienable rights come in conflict with the government, court, or human granted rights, then God-given natural inalienable rights always prevail. Do you think Jesus would agree with that? If there is a conflict between the law of God and the law of the land, regardless of what authority, what level of authority, then human laws should be subject to the law of God. This is what the Bible states on the matter. The book of Acts, chapter 4, verse 19. But Peter and John answered them, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge. It's a rhetorical question, right? So, do you remember when these words were spoken? Where were Peter and another disciple of Christ at that time? It was in Sanhedrin. It's the Supreme Court of Jewish nation, where they were questioned and where they were judged. Their case was discussed and so forth. And here's where Peter makes this statement. If we are faced with a choice to either listen to you or to God, then of course, God takes precedence. So, first statement, first point, where Jesus would definitely say yes. Any man-made laws should be consistent with God's laws. The second statement. We support the public display of the Ten Commandments as a reflection of our history and our country's Judeo-Christian heritage, and further affirm the rights of religious students to engage in voluntary prayer at public school events and to have equal access to school facilities. So two things are here. First is display of God's laws, and second, prayer anywhere in the United States of America. Do you think Jesus would say yes to these two? Let's read the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 27, verses 2 and 3. And on the day you cross over the Jordan to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall set up large stones and plaster them with plaster. And you shall write on them all the words of this law when you cross over to enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So there is a specific command to erect big monuments and to inscribe the text of the whole law, not only the Ten Commandments, but in the context it speaks about the whole book of the law, the whole Torah. So would Jesus say yes to that? Of course, most definitely. Everyone should know what the Lord commanded. So the text of commandments should be visible and available to all, for all to see. How about praying anywhere? 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 8 says, I desire that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger and quarreling. Where to pray? In every place. There should be not one single place in the land where it is prohibited to pray. So Jesus would definitely sign on and say, yes, I'm with Republicans on this one as well. The third one, traditional marriage. These are all quotation from the Republican platform, right? Traditional marriage and family based on marriage between one man and one woman is a foundation for a free society. What would be Jesus' reaction? The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, verses 4 through 6. He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Jesus believed that the definition of marriage is one male and one female, two humans becoming one flesh. That's a third point that Jesus would readily agree with. The fourth one, we assert the sanctity of human life and affirm that the unborn child has a fundamental right to life which cannot be infringed. What do you think about this? Would Jesus agree? The book of Psalms, chapter 139, verses 13 through 16. For you formed me, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. So we see a clear description that there is an existence for human being that's not born yet. And God has his plans for this unborn child that's still developing in mother's womb. So Jesus would definitely say yes, the protection for unborn. We assert the sanctity of human life and affirm that the unborn child has a fundamental right to life which cannot be infringed. So in these four examples, and these are examples only, we just can't afford to spend enormous hours, countless hours dealing with everything that's there. And of course, the Bible doesn't address all the issues that are addressed in the document. But these four, Jesus would say a definite yes to. Do you agree? Do you see it in the Bible? So Jesus would say, I agree with the Republican Party on these four ideological statements. Now, would it mean that Jesus is a Republican then? Is there something in the platform that he would disagree with? Let's take a look at some of statements as these. For example, this is dealing with wealth accumulation and poverty. This is what the platform states. Prosperity is the product of self-discipline, enterprise, saving and investment by individuals, but it is not an end in itself. This is a brilliant statement. Prosperity is not an end in itself. This is not the ultimate goal, right? So you acquire it to do something, to accomplish something using it. So what is the goal? It says, prosperity provides the means by which citizens and their families can maintain their independence from government, raise their children by their own values, practice their faith, and build communities of cooperation and mutual respect. It is also the foundation for our nation's global leadership, for it is the vigor of our economy which makes possible our military strength and our national security. So what is the wealth there for? What's the goal? What's the intended use for it? To be independent, to be strong, and to be superior to anyone else. Now, is it biblical to state such things as this? Let me read to you another quotation. The advance of political freedom and entrepreneurial capitalism drives economic growth, catalyzes private sector development, and is the only sustainable solution to poverty. It's interesting to know that when talking about wealth and its purposes, the document says that the only solution to poverty is what? Capitalism. When you work, when you earn, you become capable of taking care of yourself. So, having these statements, let's compare it with some biblical statements. What is the purpose of wealth? And when someone is accumulating wealth, what are the goals for it that God has for it? Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 11. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy and to the poor in your land. So what's the only sustainable solution to poverty? When God gives you wealth, what does He intend it to be of use for? The Bible states, God knows humans. God knows human nature, and He says, poor will always be in your land. Therefore, if you have something, share. Another statement, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verses 19 and 20. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, when moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Do not gather up wealth here for the sake of it. Think about another treasure. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. And the crowds asked him, what then shall we do? And he answered them, whoever has 2 tunics is to share with him who has none. And whoever has food is to do likewise. Pretty clear, right? If you have 2 pieces of clothing and your neighbor doesn't have any, then the commandment is to share. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. So when we earn, first of all, Bible doesn't support laziness. Bible doesn't support the condition where you are always a dependent. No. It says, work with your own hands. But when you are acquiring wealth, remember that God gives it to you for the purpose of sharing with those who are not able to. There are people with limitations in terms of age, physical capacities. There are people with chronic psychological, psychiatrics problems that will never be able to care for themselves. Or there are situations where there is some kind of a disaster happens and so forth. The Bible says there will always be poor among you. And it is a responsibility of society to help those. And of course, those who are able to work, they should work. But it is fascinating to note that the platform, the Republican platform, actually starts with wealth and economics and doesn't mention this biblical solution. It says that the only sustainable solution for poverty is basically working. I mean, each one for his own or her own. That's basically the advice there. So this is the first one, and Jesus was very big on this. He talked a lot about helping those in need. The second one, this is a controversial, well, all of them are, but we uphold the right of individuals to keep and bear arms. Lawful gun ownership enables Americans to exercise their God-given right of self-defense for the safety of their homes, their loved ones, and their communities. We need to separate the issue of owning a weapon and using a weapon. Because, as you know, anything could be a weapon. The car has become a weapon many times, right? When a person drives it into the crowd and so forth. So it's a matter of the purpose, right? And it says, again, let me repeat, it says, lawful gun ownership enables Americans to exercise their God-given right of self-defense for the safety of their homes and so forth. So where does the Bible give that right? Let's take a look at a couple of passages that raise the issue of safety and protection. The book of Leviticus, chapter 26, verses 3 and 6. If you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and do them, I will give peace in the land. And you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. And I will remove harmful beasts from the land, and the sword shall not go through your land. How to get protection and self-defense and peace? What's the biblical imperative? If you walk in my statutes, then you will have protection. And this is stated numerous times in the Bible. Let's take a look at this example. The book of Ezra, chapter 8, verses 21 and 22. Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river Ahava, that we might humble ourselves before our God to seek from him a safe journey for ourselves, our children, and all our goods. Just a bit of context. This is Ezra and the group of exiles setting to travel from Babylon to Judea, to their motherland, after the Babylonian captivity was over, right? And what do they need? Verse 21 again. Safe journey for ourselves, our children, and all our goods. It's a way of fertile crescent, if you could remember the map, from Babylon, approximately Iraq, to Israel. And you travel through many places, and at any given mile, robbers could plunder everything. So this group of people with little ones, with children and all of that, they are traveling, they have money, they have some donations from their family and from the king to go and build and restore and so forth. And they need safety, they need protection. How do they get it? By fasting and prayer. And then verse 22 says, "For I was ashamed to ask the king for a band of soldiers and horsemen to protect us against the enemy on our way, since we had told the king, the hand of our God is for good on all who seek him, and the power of his wrath is against all who forsake him." Do you see what is contrasted? If you have your God and you obey him, this is your safety, this is your protection, this is your defense. And to use army, to use heathen swords to accompany the group of God's people who have declared that they are serving God Almighty is a contradiction in itself. He did not ask for weapons because he believed in the God Almighty. There is a lot in the Bible about this. Are there people who are allowed to carry weapon and use it? Most definitely. Epistle to Romans chapter 13, verses 3 and 4. "For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer." Who is allowed to use weapons? What's the equivalent? The police, right? This passage describes those who carry swords to protect the innocent and to punish the evildoers. And this principle was rooted initially in the Torah. The Bible says, when you enter the land, appoint judges and policemen. So the word used in the original is shotrim, which means, which is the title or the term used in today's Israel to describe policemen, policewomen. So police force, right? So there are those structures. It's not given to me as an individual to avenge or to seek justice as I see it. This is never the case. God has appointed structures that are tasked with protecting the good and punishing evildoers. Then another passage. There is one passage that's used by those who firmly believe in the Second Amendment. And this is the passage, the book of Luke, chapter 22, verses 35 through 39. Jesus says, let's take a look. "When I sent you without money, bag, knapsack, and sandals, did you lack anything?" So they said, "Nothing." This is Jesus talking to his disciples, right? Then he said to them, "But now he who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack. And he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. Do you like it? So it's better to be naked, but with a sword, with a weapon. Right? What is it about? Is it the same Jesus who said, if you get slapped on one cheek, turn another? So, buy swords. That's Jesus' words. Let's read verse number 37. For I say to you that that which is written must still be accomplished in me. And he was numbered with the transgressors. For the things concerning me have an end. So they said, look, Lord, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. And the next verse, 39, coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives. Do you remember what happened there when Jesus was in that Garden of Olives? Let's recall Matthew 26, verses 51 and 52. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, put your sword back into place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Is it the same Jesus talking? So he says, 2 swords are enough, presumably. And then he says, don't use the sword, because you will perish by the sword. When we ask what does it mean to have a sword, how this word is used in Jesus' teaching, we could recall, for example, that he says, I have not come to bring peace, but sword. Remember? This is in Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 to 36. What does it mean? He says, person's enemies will be those of his own household. I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and so forth. So the term sword, and the same word is used, describes what? Strife, describes misunderstanding, describes persecutions and so forth. So Jesus is simply saying that they have had their peaceful phase of their ministry, but from now on, it will be much different. So Jesus never advocated to use a sword to protect yourself or others. So this is number 2. Number 3, attitude towards immigrants. Do you want me to quote, or it's well known? The Republican Party's attitude towards legal immigration, I'm not talking about illegal immigration, is pretty well known. What is the biblical stance? The Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 23, verses 15 and 16. You shall not give up to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. He shall dwell with you in your midst, in the place that he shall choose, within one of your towns, wherever it suits him. You shall not wrong him. Who is this slave who fled his master? Is this one of the Jewish people? No. The text says, he could choose any town, any of your towns, and settle there. He is an outsider. He has fled some conditions that made it impossible for him to live there. And he came to your place. Let him choose and let him live where the person wants to. That's God's commandment. Then another one. The book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verses 33 and 34. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you. and you shall love him as yourself. So the outsiders, the immigrants, they, according to the Bible, should have the same protection. You should treat him as the one who has been here forever, says the Bible. And then, of course, Jesus Christ, Matthew 25, verses 34 and 35. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was a stranger, and you welcomed me." Clearly, Jesus says no to this part of Republican platform. And lastly, the question of regulations. When you read the platform, this term, regulations, deregulating, and so forth, it's just all over the place. And there is a lot, but let me just read one. We will revisit existing laws that delegate too much authority to regulatory agencies and review all current regulations for possible reform or repeal. Republicans believe that no financial institution is too big to fail. We must scale back the federal role in the housing market, promote responsibility on the part of borrowers and lenders. So basically, allow the process to govern itself and hope that both lenders and borrowers will be morally responsible for their actions. Let the market regulate itself, and everything will be fine. Will Jesus say yes to this approach? The book of Genesis, chapter 8, verse 21 says, "The intention of man's heart is evil from his youth." That's the truth about humanity. Another statement, Jeremiah 17:9, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick." So if you leave a person to his or her own devices, if you leave a community to do whatever they want, if you don't have regulations and pretty strict ones, then the sinful nature will take over and has taken over many times in the past. So when we open God's law, we see that there were many regulations governing many spheres of life. For example, the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verses 3 through 5. Each seventh year, you are not to sow or reap. Stop agriculture each seventh year, because I say so, the Lord says. And then every 50th year, verse number 10 of the same chapter. Do you remember what was happening? On the 50th year, all real estate property was going back to those who possessed it 50 years ago. So over the span of 50 years, some might become rich and accumulate more land, more real estate. Some might lose it due to many factors. But once every 50 years, the economical opportunities were reset. And there are many other regulations in the Bible that directly affect economics, social structures, and so forth. And Jesus Christ, of course, when he came to the earth, he said, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, verse 17, "But it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one dot of the law to become void." So we have covered 4 things that Jesus would say yes to, and 4 things that Jesus says no to. What's the end result then? If Jesus lived today, would he become a Republican? Those of you who experienced living in the Soviet Union might remember that there was a children's organization for grades 1 through 4. They were called Little Octobrists, Октябрята in Russian, Little Octobrists. And they did a lot of good things. This is some of the statements that they believed in. The Octobrists are diligent, they love school, respect the elders. Would you agree to that? To those ideals? Only those who love work are called Octobrists. The Octobrists are truthful and courageous and skillful. The Octobrists are friendly. They read and draw, play and sing, live happily. So it's a good organization to belong to, right? Except for the fact that you needed to be an atheist to belong to the organization. So when I went to school, there was a ceremony once, and everyone became a part of this organization. And then I had to ask my teacher a question. Can I be part of this organization if I don't denounce God, if I still believe in God? So if there are many wonderful things in the platform, but there are things that are going directly opposing, in the direction opposing God's law, you could not, in clear conscience, sign up and espouse everything. So Jesus Christ would not be able to call himself a Republican. He would agree with many things, but he would disagree with many things. That's the result of our analysis today. Our next sermon is Jesus Christ, Democrat. May God bless you in making valid moral decisions.